Welcome to the EarthRise podcast. This is Beres. My fascination with neuroscience came about thanks to Daniel Levitin's book, This Is Your Brain on Music. But it wasn't until reading Dr. John Ratey's 2008 book, Spark, the revolutionary new science of exercise in the brain, that I started seriously thinking about how brain training and physical fitness were connected. In many ways, his book led to my own 2017 work, Whole Motion, Training Your Brain and Body for Optimal Health. I included research from Dr. Ratey in my book, both from Spark and his 2014 follow-up, Go Wild, Free Your Body and Mind from the Afflictions of Civilization. Needless to say, Dr. Ratey's been a big influence. So when Brandon McMillan at Treehouse Recovery recently offered to connect us, I was thrilled. In our discussion, we talk about Dr. Ratey's work in addiction recovery, as well as the problems and benefits of technology, how starch and sugars are destroying our bodies due to inflammation, why diversity in movement is necessary, and a whole host of other topics. It was truly a pleasure to chat with him. I've been a little quiet on the podcasting front lately, but that's changing. I have 4 interviews scheduled over the next month, including Ronald Purser, discussing his new and insightful book, McMindfulness, How Mindfulness Became the New Capitalist Spirituality. Maura O'Connor talking about her incredible new book, Wayfinding, the Science and Mystery of How Humans Navigate the World. And probably one of the scariest works I've read, Eyes in the Sky, The Secret Rise of Gorgon's Stare and How It Will Watch Us All, by Arthur Holland Michel. I'll also be chatting with my friend, Reagan Williams, next week about her work preventing child sex trafficking, a topic that's at the top of our mind due to the recent news around Jeffrey Epstein. So please, stay tuned in. These are all going to be amazing conversations. The EarthRise podcast is now also available on Spotify. But however you listen to it, if you appreciate these conversations, please share them or rate them. And keep in touch with me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or you can find all of these via my website, derekberes.com. And now for my talk with Dr. John Ratey. Thank you for taking the time to talk. I don't think I've quoted anyone as much as you in all of my articles and research over the years. You've been a big personal influence, both in my career as a journalist and as a fitness instructor, and I really appreciate all of the work you've done.
Oh no, it's wonderful I love talking about this whole area. It's so important and so unrecognized by the majority of the world.
It really is, and as I mentioned, Spark especially. We'll talk about Go Wild as well, but Spark was such an influential book in terms of how it discusses the necessity of brain health for physical fitness and vice versa. And I really think that the insights are a profound rebuttal to Cartesian dualism, this idea that, we can do things for our brain completely separate from our body. It's almost like they're different worlds. And I would first like to know what initially made you interested in this connection and why you devoted so much of your work to it.
It's a longer story, as they all are. But I grew up being an athlete, okay? And back then, athletes were not necessarily fit. But I played all sports all the time, so I was really pretty fit. But no one worked out. We had to be forced on our tennis team to run a mile. That's the kind of fitness we weren't. But yet we were Pennsylvania state champs. So I was always aware of fitness. And then when I finally got to medical school, I came across an article one day. I was interested in psychiatric issues, and there was an article in the press about this hospital in Sweden that was offering, or Norway, that was offering patients the option of taking one of our brand new amazing antidepressants that we just got about 6 years before the article, or an exercise program. And they were finding the same benefits. it sort of intuitively made sense to me. And certainly people were talking about exercise as a way to affect the brain, but this was always logged in my memory. And when I went off, got overwhelmed with medical school a bit and stopped exercising, I noticed the difference. So then I came to Boston, and where everybody was, I came in the midst of Bill Rogers and the marathon here, the explosion of growth in the 70s, and I started running like everybody else did. There was all this hubbub about it, and then Candace Pert discovered the endorphins, and so we went off measuring endorphins, and not me, but people here in marathoners, and finding the big, incredible surge in endorphins, and then that became a thing, and it still is the phrase, I want to go raise my endorphins because I'm feeling a little crappy and I better go work out or go for a run or go to the gym, whatever. And so that was the beginning of it. And then when I was just starting out of residency and teaching and had my own practice, I was very interested in ADHD or ADD back then, and because I was also interested in aggression, and a lot of people with aggression have a history of having ADHD or ADD or dyslexia. And I met this, I was talking about how I was thinking a lot of people who were in our hospitals were probably ADD. And there was this professor there at this cocktail party where I was sort of holding forth a little bit. And he said, "Can I come see you?" And he did. And turns out he was taught both at Harvard and at MIT and was a MacArthur Fellow and had written these books that I had in my library. He said, "Well, I was an early marathoner, and I twisted my ankle about 2 years ago, or my ankle and then my knee, and so I can't run anymore, or I haven't been able to run like I was. And at the same time, I noticed all my productivity has dropped." He says, "And I think I have adult onset attention deficit disorder," which hadn't been ever mentioned before, but here it was. And so I became, I saw him as a patient and treated him with some medicine, helped him out, and followed him along. When he got back to running after his knee problem healed, he didn't need the medicine, but every now and then. And I followed him for a number of years, but he was one of my first patients, actually, that had ADD, and it struck me that this was a way of treating attention, because he was a super productive guy, and then all of a sudden couldn't get started, was getting angry and losing friends and forgetting things and all the kinds of stuff that people with attention problems have. But he never did before he wasn't running his 7 miles a day. So that's really got me interested in two things. One was attention deficit disorder in adults, especially, and it began a journey on that whole area. But but always paying attention to this seemingly magical effect of exercise on attention. But also then we were beginning to, there was noise being made about it being useful for mood problems and for type A personalities. Duke University Medical School was just churning up their interest in making type A's into type B's by having them exercise and seeing their aggressive personalities drop, their moods improve, their anxiety improve, their response to stress get better. All these things were sort of semi-observational, and they began to measure stuff and so forth. And so I began very much sort of watching the medical literature. And then when we started writing books about ADD and another book I wrote called Shadow Syndromes, and always talked about, in terms of treatment, exercise as an incredible treatment for a variety of disorders. In fact, most disorders. So I became really very much in the camp of writing about it, talking about it, lecturing. It would be part of my lecture. A small part of my lectures would be using exercise to improve mood or improve attention, improve aggression. All of that was got me started early on.
Your work also introduced me to one of the most fascinating books I've ever read, which is Eye of the Vortex by Rodolfo Linnaeus.
Yes.
You quote him in Spark, which that which we call thinking is the evolutionary internalization of movement. It's a quote that I keep on my wall. It's a constant reminder of the importance of movement. As I mentioned, I'm a fitness instructor at Equinox for 15 years. I teach a lot of different modalities. I move every day. Diversity of movement is extremely important to me, so my workouts vary and how I teach varies. And I wonder, given our history as a species that relied so heavily on diverse movements for so long, why do you think it is that we have come to a situation now where, although I will say fitness culture in America has definitely grown, especially since the 70s, as you mentioned, but the lack of engagement in movement, especially diverse forms of movement, meaning I know people who only run or only do yoga or only get into one sort of thing when it's so important to move in a variety of ways. Why do you think that people have lost touch with that sense of play in their physical activities?
It's a very good question, a very good point. And I think what we have is a coevolution of our environment that has made it less part of our lives, a necessary part of our lives, from everything that the wonders of the digital world has brought us, to cars, to helping us do better, quicker, less exertion in everything that we do. And this has led to this sort of sedentary culture that we have, and it's literally killing us. But this is where we're at. So it's a mismatch on what we're supposed to be doing according to our genes, and so are expecting to do. So it's really about all the reasons that we get shut down and have stopped doing it is because we don't need, it's not part of our natural life. I was just over in Abu Dhabi and working with an educational group at one point, and it was clear that these kids who are so given to, and that's a special kind of given to, really aren't moving at all. They don't have to, and they don't want to. And you see the problems with the lack of motivation, the lack of interest. And literally, I was writing to a friend about this just recently, just this morning. This wasn't part of their lives, and so why should it be? Because they didn't need to do that. The sad news is that it doesn't. I mean, and especially what you're saying about the variety of movements. Oh my God, that's so important to all of us, to keep every part of our body moving at some point. And the focus now on necessary focus on balance training, even. I mean, that's huge. Because we're not moving as much, because we're not moving in various different environments and different challenges, our balance goes away, especially as we age. And so we see this as a huge problem. And now I see it a huge problem with these learning disabled kids of sorts, of ADD, dyslexia, autistic kids. They're really have trouble balancing, physically balancing as well as mentally balancing. And so by training the one, you can have an effect on the other. back to Linnaeus. I mean, it is internalization of that balance can help you balance your cognitive and emotional life.
When I teach yoga classes, one of the most challenging parts of the body that I find students have trouble with is I spend a lot of time working on their feet and ankles. And they laugh when I tell them that, when Nike introduced the padded running shoe, it really did a disservice to our anatomy and our physiology and our species. But it is true. People have such little range of motion and everything starts in their feet. And you write about that. Daniel Lieberman spends a lot of time writing about that as well.
Yes.
Because you touch upon it, how you understand and how you would train someone or talk to them about why the importance of minimalism in footwear or being barefoot is such an important aspect of physical health.
When you take the comfort of the incredible soles that you can get with the shoes, various shoes, it throws everything off. It's not the way we're made. Born to Run, Chris McDougall's book, is a testament to that when he was running with the wild men of Mexico that would run forever barefoot. One can do that, and what happens when you're running with the back foot strike or the
heel strike,
is you put an incredible amount of torque and pressure on your knees and your ankles and your hips. By correcting that with the thin-soled shoes or the barefoot running shoes, you're forcing yourself to go land on the front part of your foot, and this helps to correct or avoid those damages, because we're made to move that way, and yet we don't do it.
You were talking about attention, and I know that's in the major aspect of your career. And in Spark, you write about 0-hour PE and the effects of the before-school elective program had on children's academic performance. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on why school administrators often cut programs like PE and the arts to focus on STEM curriculum. Isn't that missing half the point of what an education should be?
Absolutely. That's what I spend my time doing around the world, is lecturing about. Trying to get that to change back and trying to wake people up that this is, just the wrong way to do things. It's very interesting what's happening in China these days. In the educational system, a large number of Chinese educators are beginning to turn this around. They traditionally, a long time ago, years ago, they had an emphasis on fitness, physical fitness, in amongst their students. But then it all became testing. And so followed the world, or they were following us, I'm not sure. But now they're more aware of the fact that fit student is a better student, is more receptive, is more cooperative, has better attention, has better capacity, actually learns quicker and better, and tests better. So you're seeing a sort of a resurgence there in the amount of time spent in PE and the emphasis for the individual student. But here we're doing just the opposite, and there are lots of reasons for it. The big one is that there's so many different demands on people, on the educational system, the teachers, and they want their time with the kids. They want as much time as what they believe is the best way to get them to do well on the test scores that they need to achieve is to have them sit in their seat and have the teacher force it into them. And so they're very guarded of giving up any time for such things as the arts and physical education. And again, it misses the point of what PE should be about, to make kids fitter. And not just you have educated executives who just see PE as something for the athletes. And a lot of time, when I went to school, that was fairly what it was, although everybody sort of participated more so than they are today. But a lot of schools, that's who benefit from having PE, because it helps them use the time to get back to improve their level of fitness. But other kids are just sitting around. So it becomes less of a focus. And the whole scenario you talk about with Naperville, I mean, there were kids that were reading delayed coming into ninth grade. They were still needing to boost their reading scores because they were delayed, and they had a special course for that. And so these kids volunteered to come in early to have a very intensive PE class before their makeup class for reading, and their scores were 2 and 3 times better than the kids who didn't come in for an hour before school and go running and doing calisthenics, but just all of that to get there, to prepare them to learn. And now it's so embedded in so many schools that now the people know, oh, if I have especially with students who have some kind of learning problem, we better get them moving because that's going to improve their capacity, improve their ability to take in information. For instance, we started a program with Reebok called BOKS, B-O-K-S, which is a preschool, before school program in K through 5. And it's now in about 4,600 schools, in elementary schools in the U.S. And it is voluntary again most of the time, and it's very popular amongst the kids and the parents. They bring the kids in early for an hour, 3 to 5 days a week, and they're vigorously playing. It's a curriculum that has evolved over the past 6-7 years. They're running, chasing each other, laughing outside if possible. They're developing some skills, but the emphasis is on getting the kids moving, and moving a lot. And so who loves this? Not only the parents and the kids themselves, but especially special ed teachers love it, because the kids that participate in BOKS are much more ready to take in information and deal with it.
That's fascinating. I didn't know about that program. I was going to ask because I know that you had written that 0 Hour had extended beyond Naperville, but I'm wondering if it has gone national, or if you are aware of any other programs like that have sprung up since then.
Yes, there are a number around the country that do that, but not in any kind of, oh, this is going to be this state or this citywide thing. There are other schools, districts in Illinois, and one in Arlington, Virginia, that use this model for their kids that are special needs, so that they have a situation where they have them come in early and exercise or make their PE program fit right before some of their tougher courses. But again, the people that are working the hardest and being pushed by everybody is the teachers, for all the wrong reasons, but it's the way it is. They're being told to do this, do that, do this, do that, get your kids' scores up, treat everybody the same, teach them all at the same level. It's an impossible task. It's hard to change anybody, to change any system, but to have yet another change, which they get every 2 or 3 years. There's a whole new educational philosophy that takes over, and this leads to chronic fatigue and disappointment, discouragement on the teacher side and the student side. So it's hard to initiate something radical like this.
I think you touched upon an important aspect of it, though, which is play. As I said, I've worked in gyms for a long time, and while I love that culture and I love being in there, so many people they do a set. It's a very serious, controlled thing, and there really is no, on machines, there's not a lot of opportunity for play. And I wonder how you incorporate that into your programs that you help set up.
Well, it's a very important part of the program for all of us. I mean, we're missing that. Adults are missing that like crazy, right? Just for instance, I just learned about pickleball. Have you heard about pickleball?
Yes.
It's the fastest growing sport in America. Pickleball. It's a dumb sport, but it's fun and it's play. It's like it's in some ways one of the easiest sports you could do. But people move and they laugh and they have fun and they get better and then they get competitive and it's a sport that just grows. And so why? Because I think we're missing that kind of playful movement, interaction, as well as the social aspect of it and all that. But it's something that we really need to go back and remember how important play was in all of our lives. And we forget. And now, especially with our devices, which rule us and our kids especially, or us especially, as well as our kids, the play becomes virtual, and which is really, really a big, huge problem.
That's exactly where I was going to go next, because I work full-time in blockchain for a technology company. I grew up the son of a computer programmer. I've worked with computers. I love them. And yet when I walk into the gym, you look down the row of cardio machines and people are doing their cardio texting or looking at stuff on their phone. And I just want to go over and explain to them that you're not learning whatever you're looking at on your phone, and you're also not working out optimally.
Right.
How do you get that across, or how do you feel about our constant distraction with phones?
Well, it's hard not to see it as the beginning of the end.
Agreed.
I mean, it can be great. I mean, there isn't anything better than to have the world at your fingertips. There really isn't. I mean, information. I was writing about Epictetus. Anyway, a philosopher Epictetus. So I went to Google to have him pronounce it, or pronounce, how do you really say this old Greek name? And it was surprising. Epictetus, and where do you get that? I mean, think about it. Just how does that happen? So it's so magical that you have your personal tutor, as well as, okay, what's really happening in Rwanda now, and stuff. We can check it out in a minute. Ask any question, and it just is so exciting. So it just opens up this vista and that. So it's wonderful, but it's so addicting. And the parents are starting to have a little bit of awareness. My grandkids they're not screen addicted yet. They want to be, but their parents are sort of keeping them off of it and interacting with them and outside in the summertime. And, even though the parents are always on their phone at times, and reading on their phone and whatever, it becomes so difficult to say, okay, don't do as I do as I say, which is, don't be on your phone all the time. And yet you know what it's like. Yeah, you say in the gym, anywhere you go, in a social setting,
Well, I think I read one time some statistic about millennials, and something like 30% of them have admitted to checking their phone while having sex. And and if that's the case, we are in trouble. But I try my best, because I write about a lot of studies, and we all have, especially in this age of political polarization, we look for things that confirm our own beliefs. And I try to take the evidence and read the studies for what they are and not let it be colored. It's challenging, but I truly do believe that if you're going to look down the road in a few generations, you're going to see a big uptick in diseases of dementia because of this reliance of offloading memory to our devices. And I wonder if you have any experience or any thoughts on that topic.
Oh, yeah, in a very personal way. I mean, since we've had GPS, I mean, I used to be really good with directions, really point-to-point directions. I knew how to get places and would remember how to do it. Now, I mean, even when I'm going someplace that I know the way and been that way all the time, I sometimes will have my GPS on for whatever reason. So that part of my brain is not being accessed, and it's being assisted, augmented. My friend Alex Lightman's book, The Augmented World. I mean, yeah, and I don't need to be augmented there, but yet I'm doing it. The whole dementia and all that. I mean, I worry about it, but I more worry about the lack of physical activity that really leads to all the reasons why we get demented. High sugar or glucose content in our blood, and that really is toxic to our nerve cells, and the lack of building our brain cells, that go on when we're exercising and creating the right environment for our brain cells to grow and grow new ones. All that stuff is really being retarded by putting us in our seats most of the time and focusing on our little phone. Oh my God! Now there's millennials. Speaking of them, there's a new problem that they're coming up with, which I just learned about the other day. They're growing horns.
Oh, I wrote about that. Yes, yes.
Oh, you did? Okay. Oh my God! They're growing horns. What?
I want to stick on diet for a moment, though, because in Go Wild, you write that diseases of civilization are diseases of starch. And you had mentioned mismatch before, and I always think of Daniel Lieberman's work with that because he talks about mismatch diseases.
Right.
And I would love for you to go a little bit deeper into that sugar and starch and how it affects our brain and bodies.
Starch is, we're all addicted to glucose, I mean, and to sugar and to starch. And starch is, no matter how wonderful this starch is and how unprocessed it is, it's still packed glucose, and it will be broken down into glucose, and our glucose levels are too high. They're getting higher. And what happens is we get to the point where we get insulin insensitivity, thus pushing us more towards diabetes or type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome, all of which leads to eventually being toxic to our cells, and especially our nerve cells, that eventually you begin to have erosion and miscommunication within the cell, and eventually the cells are not as effective, and perhaps leading to cell death. And then you really get into the dementias and depression and all the things that happen when we're in this sort of toxic mode. And today, in the anti-aging world, I mean, all they talk about is inflammation, and starch and sugars, or sugar itself is a huge, at a high levels, causes a big jump in inflammation. And this then leads to problems with cell communications and within the cell as well as cell to cell, so that you begin to have dis-ease, and you're out of whack with your own, within your own body. I mean, I may not be a dessert hound, but oh boy, do I love bread. which is just sugar.
Yeah, bread was the hard one for me. I've limited it to about once a week now, but I would eat bread daily. I was a vegetarian for about 2 decades, and uh, about 4 years ago, I had heard two different podcasts where people talked about GI problems and how a paleo style diet helped them overcome the same problems I had experienced chronically. And so I decided to start eating meat again and reducing my carb intake. And what fascinated me was over the course of those decades, I had hundreds of panic attacks. I had a very severe anxiety disorder. When I switched to I don't want to say it's purely paleo because I don't eat that way, but influenced by that. I haven't had a panic attack in 4 years. Just this morning in the Atlantic, there was an article linking anxiety disorder and allergies and how people who have one tend to have the other. And yes. I also realized that in that time, I haven't had my seasonal allergies where I had it the whole time I was vegetarian. And I don't attribute it only to eating meat. I do attribute it to carb reduction. But you write that eating meat is a fundamental and defining fact of the human condition at the gut level and bred in the bones. So I wonder what your feelings are about this plant-based diet movement that's happening that I think from an ethical standpoint is wonderful, and I think there are opportunities there, but I wonder overall how you feel about that.
I lived paleo for a while, and I lost weight, I got more energy, I slept better, all that. And but it's hard to maintain in our world. It's hard to maintain. I mean, God, they're so seductive with the food, and it's hard to maintain that. But so personally, I think it really does play a role. I mean, to reduce carb intake and find fat and find protein that can help give you the necessary calories that we need throughout the day. Believe me, I'm much more plant-based. I'm a plant-based paleo guy. I would find myself. It's because it's stupid not to include that. And don't forget, a big part of our evolution, our caveman diet was a lot of vegetables, but a lot of different ones, yes. Not just the 30 that we have or so, a lot of different ones and a lot of fiber with them. So it's very different than going and getting a spinach meal or something, and I do think that we are meat eaters, and environmentally, yes. Worry about it, yes. Is there a better way to do it? Probably. Is it Beyond Meats or Impossible Burgers or whatever, Impossible Meat? No, probably not. Yeah, but someday we'll get there, maybe.
Well, I am a fan of and I've interviewed a few different people who work on pluripotent cells and the whole idea of a laboratory created meat that would match meat. I mean, if you can take animal cells and create something out of it to reduce suffering, I think that's a wonderful way to go. But I think that it just came out last week. There was some research done about Impossible Beyond Meat, Impossible Burgers, and another company where they have carcinogenic ingredients right. in their vegetable patties, basically. And so is that really worth the trade-off? There's an ethical bonus, sure, but if you're going to give yourself cancer eventually by eating that, I don't think that's a valuable trade-off.
Right. I think that whole idea is worthy, and we'll get better. There'll be less junk in Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger, or the next generation, the next iteration. They'll be better, because that's the way the world goes. Is just be able to advertise that this is better and safer, and we'll get there because we have the science to get us there. It's just like, okay, a big part of what we're also talking about is the microbiome, right? Where, and you with your anxiety and with your allergies are all about your microbiome, So you change your microbiome when you changed your diet, when you added meat and protein back and probably more fat back into your diet, reduce the carbs. your microbiome changed. And your microbiome is huge. And today, along with inflammation, and they work together, and exercise, and all these things are involved with each other. And the microbiome is a massive area of interest, and is as well it should be, and we're talking in the past 15 years, this has been an interest, or growing interest, and now it's just everywhere. We're going to understand this. I know it. I'm working with a whole group of autistic adults and kids in upstate New York, and they've discovered something about the microbiome in our very, very severely autistic kids that's different. We're beginning to see things, and that's just going to be driven by more and more science, by more and more understanding, by all the world getting interested in this.
Well, actually, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, I covered a study that had come out about autism and processed foods, and looking at the potential link between mothers eating certain forms of processed foods and that link to autism in childhood. And when I published it, it was definitely one of the more controversial pieces, because autism is such a controversial topic. But I do think that we have to investigate when you look at the ingredient list on what you're eating, and most of it is unpronounceable chemicals, how could that not have an effect on your body?
Right. Exactly. And, we've been seeing just about autism, and I'll quickly go through this, but we've seen this incredible increase in numbers, right? I mean, it's 1 in 59 live births are going to be autistic in the United States. 1 in 35 in South Korea are going to be autistic, okay, and are on the spectrum. That's amazing. When I was in medical school, it was 1 in 10,000, okay? Gives you sort of great pause. What have we done differently? What's been different in the civilized world, so-called, in the first world countries, where we're seeing this incredible increase in autism? Processed food, this is back in 1990 we were seeing this, okay? Processed food was one. The other was computers, sitting in front of a computer screen. Mom being pregnant and sitting in front of a computer screen. Whether that had anything to do with it, or whether the processed food did, or whether whatever, but there's something environmentally going on, because the numbers are out of this world. I mean, it's just amazing.
Just 2 more things I wanted to ask you about. First, we were introduced from Brandon at Treehouse Recovery, and he had initially reached out to me at saying you were doing some work with that. And I wonder if you're doing anything with addiction recovery.
Yes. I have a nonprofit called Sparking Life. Our recent shift in agenda is to look at exercise as a part of the treatment for people in recovery, coming off addictions, because it's an area that, like you mentioned, and like we know in the schools, they're not doing it. But in a lot of these recovery centers, they're not doing it. They're not doing it as a part of their recovery. It's optional. You go to fancy recovery centers, and they have lots of nice equipment, and they recommend it, but it's not like you got to do this. Like Treehouse is very much part of their deal. We just had a big conference, the conference of people from all over the country who have different recovery centers and who use exercise as a big part of their recovery path. CrossFitters and Orange Theory people, and people that are using it to help people in recovery stay in recovery and stay recovered, and find a different path throughout their life. And in Spark, I wrote a chapter on addictions, because we know that exercise is a tremendous way to help us deal with cravings and addiction need and all that. I mean, we really have a tool here that can be very, very useful. And the people at Treehouse have been doing it now for however long, and really evolved in an incredibly interesting program because they're big things, their big emphasis is on exercise and physical health, as well as being connected to people and then other people in the recovery program. And connection is the other big news, if you will, of how we know how important mental health, physical health is. Being connected to other people is not just a good idea, it's essential for both our body and our brains and our souls and all that. Being we have proof that that being connected makes a huge difference.
Also, I mean, you write about that in Go Wild. You say running, movement, social bonding, and emotional well-being have a common chemical pathway. Chemically, these seemingly disparate topics hang together, and we ought to pay attention to that as a big signpost of evolution's design. I mean, I teach what's called group fitness, but evolutionary group fitness was what gave humans a leg up. I'm wondering, to finish, if you can discuss the sort of social aspect of fitness and why that's important. And also, if you could recommend, like when you go to people, you had mentioned that certain movements like yoga, they have benefits, but that cardiovascular training and strength training seem to have the best bang for your buck in terms of mental health. So I wonder if what exercises you recommend to people that you come across.
Well, okay. Your first part of the question, I've already forgotten.
Sorry, I know that was the social aspect of exercise. Why that's relevant.
It's very relevant. What I say and always harangue about is the best kind of exercise is exercise you do outside with others, something that you enjoy and is fun, so you'll come back to it. That is challenging, so that you push yourself, or the social group pushes you to do it, to do more. It does, and it pushes you to show up. So that's why the running groups, the biking groups, CrossFit, Orange Theory, all the things that are wild today, pickleball leagues, I mean, my God. Those are very, very important and very health-giving. And I think that's what we really need, and we get a lot of benefit with the social connection. We get flooded with, or not flooded, but we get an improvement and increase in our oxytocin, which is our bonding and love hormone, which is one of the great hormones that we have in our body that does mostly very positive stuff for us. In terms of mood, in terms of well-being, in terms of intellectual capacity, memory, etc. And that's one of the big things on the anti-aging list is being connected in a group. And I'm working with a group out of called Wider Circle, WIDER Circle, out of Stanford, that really uses exercise and socialization as an anti-aging platform, and having good success with it. Now insurance companies around the U.S. are using it, and it can really be, it really has a health promoting benefit, other than just having fun. Makes your brains and your body work better, and it gets us back to that, like you say, your evolutionary group fitness model. It's like, and then if you're having fun and you're people supportive and challenging at the same time, ideal for developing the right kind of program, like the box program. I mean, it was amazing to see a fourth grader in this program. I just happened to see a few of them, but a fourth grader helping a first grader to make it to the goal, make it to the run correctly, or run and put the ball in the hoop, or whatever he was doing, whatever the task was. and so it just, one of the teachers says, yeah, well, that happens on the court here, but then you see them in school and they have a connection to one another. So a first grader having a connection to a fourth grader is a big deal when you're in elementary school. But anyway, that's the kind of thing that generates so much positivity in our lives.